and becoming more whoa, as I get older. And some of you may be familiar with some of the information that's going to be presented, but not knowing exactly who's attended the previous water walks, we're just going to get started with some basics about building healthy soils. But to give you the background of how did this come about, and it's hard for me to do Zoom because I'm going to have my hands flying around, but I'm sure you're used to that. So, using healthy soils and landscapes is a mitigation strategy within our 2019 San Antonio Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And here's how it kind of reads. And we were all just back there in 2018 trying to figure out how this was going to work and how it was going to be implemented. And of course, many of you may be familiar with Lisa Martinez, who brought to the table this idea. And with further research, she and I actually met with the Natural Resource Conservation Service and asked them to come to San Antonio to do a baseline soil carbon survey. Okay, and then COVID hit, right? But now the NRCS actually has completed taking samples, over 700 samples at 59 sites across the city. And those samples are still being analyzed. And that may be a part of what happens when you get something for free, is that it takes a long time. We're hoping that we have that data at the end of the year. We know that our field supervisor consultant, who's been wonderful to work with, Travis Razor, will actually be giving a presentation on it at the soil conference that'll be held in San Antonio this November. So further to do, working with the different departments in San Antonio, it was decided that parks would end up being our lead agency, and they actually are the one that provided the right of entry to the NRCS to do the soil sampling across the entire county, actually. So waiting for these results and knowing that we could start working on building soil health, parks decided to make a leap forward to begin working with creating healthy soils, because we know that the healthy soils will actually increase not only carbon sequestration, but also all the co-benefits that come with that. And as a part of their park plan, it just fit. It was a beautiful match, and they've been a wonderful partner. So we decided to select 13 parks across the city. They were going to be our demonstration parks. We went into the parks where we thought we might put in some best management practices that we'll talk about, and collected baseline soil health data. And so that data has been collected, analyzed, talked about, reported on. And from that, it was decided that park staff really needed to have more training on how do we make this happen. And part of what we're going to be talking about is what we've given to the park staff in their training. And what we really wanted to focus on, because we wanted this to be something that it was transferable, implementable, and wouldn't cost a lot of money. And some of you may have heard that, the city is in a little bit of a deficit, scrambling around to try to meet this year's budget. And of course, one of the first places they look is parks. So looking at landscape practices, it's kind of like, well, how is that really going to help make much of an impact in our cities, our municipalities, for addressing climate change? We just want to talk about, these are the urban challenges that everybody across the globe is facing, but especially here in San Antonio. We know that climate change has created a situation where there's more frequent and severe flooding, droughts, and now freezes. We've been dealing with insufficient water for a long time, for not only the Edwards Aquifer, but throughout this area, which is one of the fastest growing areas in the country. And with all of the development with it, with the loss of trees and natural vegetation on our land, we have an increase in water and air pollution. And so this land degradation, this is a global issue. And I want to throw this out because, and I'm not saying that fossil fuels are good or anything, but just to kind of get it into another perspective is that 20 to 30% of the extra CO2 that we have in our atmosphere is coming from land degradation across the globe, whether that's cutting down forests, new development, just erosion from farmlands or whatever, or just the loss of productivity of land. So when you have the big pie chart there in the sky, you've got building energy, you've got mobile pollution, but there's also land degradation. So when land is not in a healthy state, it is actually re-releasing CO2 to the atmosphere. So kind of keeping that in mind, it'll better put a better twist on understanding how landscape practices can really benefit some of the soil health and addressing climate change. And we're all familiar with loss of biodiversity. And one of the saddest ones for me is the loss of recreational activity from birding to fishing to swimming. And our, excuse me, streams and rivers are really not safe, especially after a rain event for our children to be exposed to the water. So the strategy that landscape practice can assist with climate change is based on the soil being an ecosystem. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this ecosystem has the ability to remove and store more CO2 from the air than all of the above ground vegetation, including trees. But soils, trees, and vegetation, they all work together and they all have to be in a healthy state to provide the maximum benefits. And that's what we're looking to try to do here. And by providing those benefits, that's reducing heat island effect, removing greenhouses, not just the CO2, but the other ones also, reducing flooding, stormwater for future use, and removing pollutants from the air and the water. And to bring us back, to get us start, it all begins with the water cycle. And to cast your mind back to your school days, learning about how the water moves through our global ecosystem. But bottom line, when it rains, the water will either run off, and like one of my favorite stormwater engineer always says, and it always runs downhill, or it will infiltrate, soaking into the ground. And the result of more water soaking into the ground means that there's less runoff, reducing flooding, especially those peak flows. There's greater recharge for rivers, lakes, aquifers, wells, and even soils. Less water pollution when the water slowly gets infiltrated. And where does that water go? When it's in the soil. And that's what I really, let's see if it'll show up. Yes. Oh. That actually, I apologize. I'm the one with the telephone. In that circle, this is where all the action is happening. The water is infiltrating, and just like any water, it's going downhill. It's moving to the lowest point in the soil profile, which is going to be our streams, lakes, and rivers. And then, of course, this also recharges the aquifer and water, groundwater for wells. We often forget about that in San Antonio since we're so dependent on the aquifer itself. But this provides more plant growth and health for the soil biome. So using landscape practices as a strategy, adopting practices, this is what everything is built around, to allow more rain to soak into the ground. And their main practices that we'll be discussing today is the building that healthy soil, modifying mowing practices to build that healthy soil, and to install what we call best management practices, or BMPs, or green stormwater infrastructure, such as a berm, rain garden, or a bioswale, which will increase our soil health because it's going to provide more moisture. So some of you may have already seen this, this diagram. I love it. This is the Webster Dictionary of soil. It's got mineral particles with different sizes, such as clay, silt, sand, and gravel. You've got organic matter, which is a very, very small, the smallest component, and some air and water. And that's your average soil. And we actually did have some park soils that had 5% organic matter. Those that have been previously Agriculture land were closer to 3, and then we had a couple in our riparian areas that were closer to 8, which is very exciting. But while all of these components of the soil are very important and play a role, it's the soil organic matter that's actually going to provide the basis for the ecosystem services. Therefore, everything is built in to increase that soil organic matter, protect it from erosion, high temperatures, compaction, etc. So here's the new definition, and I'm going to put the challenge out to this group because I can see that we have a great group of folks. We need another definition of soil that actually defines it as an ecosystem so that we can put that in our unified development code. So soil organic matter plays a crucial role as it fuels the life within the soil, creating this living ecosystem. It creates plenty of air pockets that allow stormwater to enter, those pores that enable the rainwater to go in, not only into the soil, but to percolate throughout the soil. And we forget about that roots and the organisms in the soil actually have to either get oxygen or CO2 or one or the other, so that we have to have that gas exchange going on too. But the other cool thing about the soil organic matter, it creates this sponge-like qualities. And if you're older like me, you remember the advertising for absorbing 300 times its weight in stomach acids. But that's what organic matter can do. It can just fill up like a sponge, and it slowly releases it into the soil profile, allowing it to recharge lakes, rivers, and creeks again more slowly. And by doing so, that water is filtered and more clean. And again, we're going to be repeating this formula or this statement that a 1% increase in soil organic matter can store an additional, on top of what's already there, an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre per rain event. And a lot of the stormwater engineers will go, well, Debbie, if you have saturated clay, you can't really do much with it. But there's not really in the stormwater engineer or in engineers, there's not really a field for understanding structure, the ability of the soil to percolate. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that happens. So as we look at what soil organic matter can do in reducing floods, we just to kind of get a feeling for what is the potential here. So in parks, we got about 15,000 acres of green space that they're responsible for managing. And increasing that organic matter by just 1%, we can store an additional 306 million gallons of water. And that's a pretty big amount. And then, to understand that all of our flood control projects are built on those peak flows. So if we can shave off the top of that stormwater runoff that hits our creeks in a New York minute in our flash flood alley situation, then we can actually reduce the size of our flood control projects too. And the cool thing about the organic matter is that it holds this moisture loosely. So if a plant needs it, it just latches onto it, and the soil organic matter will release it easily, making it really easy for roots to get what they need from that organic matter. And there's a whole bunch more stuff going on in that organic matter with nutrients. We'll talk about that. So healthy soils also improve air quality. But again, by that 1% increase, we can store additional CO2, and this is on an annual basis, not on an event basis, but on it annually, we can mitigate the emissions coming from about 100,000 vehicles. So it's not the magic bullet. It won't protect us from Harvey, but it definitely plays a role in mitigating and creating more sustainable, livable communities. So the type of organic matter matters. And where most of our organic matter starts is in that top layer, that organic layer, where you can actually see the leaves and the dead bugs and the twigs and everything. And that layer is really reactive. It's coming and going every day. And we want to protect that layer in order to assist the organic matter to move down into the profile. Moving that soil organic matter into the profile, that's when we really start calling it soil carbon. And that's the long-term mitigation that we're looking for, especially to get us through these trying times. We want at least decades to centuries. And as my friend says, well, Debbie, you know those cracks you get in your clay, your blackland prairie clay soils. Next time you water, all that surface organic matter just goes right down in those cracks. So it gave me a new appreciation for cracks in my clay soil, and hopefully you will also develop that appreciation. So what we want to do is to move the organic matter through the profile. So healthy soil support healthy plants and landscapes. That's a no-brainer. But this healthy soil that we've been talking about contains a variety of bacteria, fungi, and other organisms. It assists plants to access the water and the nutrients they need for healthy growth. And I like using the analogy that all of these organisms in the soil are kind of like our gut bacteria. They can actually take the food, the organic matter, and break it down into those nutrients that they need, just like we need calcium and magnesium and nitrogen for our proteins. They do the same thing. So having a healthy soil with this dynamic and diverse microflora really assists in creating those healthy landscapes. And of course, one of my favorite fungi in the soil is the mycorrhiza. They can be inside or outside the roots, but they're in association with the roots. And I think it is so cool that they can actually increase the soil that a root can utilize up to 700 times than what it could do with just its roots alone. And of course, this makes mycorrhiza vital for tree survival in San Antonio. But we're finding mycorrhiza on everything. They're even finding it on vegetable crops and cereal grains. So I think we'll see a larger and greater role for mycorrhiza in the future. Aggregation. I love that word. It's just such a simple word, but aggregation is where it's all out at. So soil particles, those little particles that we were talking about, or aggregate together. And it's the mucus around the soil organisms that help pull these aggregates together. These aggregates are incredible. They improve the water holding capacity and also the gas exchange, and therefore increasing drought resistance. They protect the soil from wind and water erosion. They allow for the nutrient transport, including the oxygen that we were talking about, and they assist in increasing carbon sequestration. And yep, here's another habitat that we actually have to manage and think about. These aggregates provide the habitat for the microorganisms within those little air pockets. So a lot is going on. And sometimes, you've got these soil health tests that you can do, and they change. The soil health test, depending on the time of year you're taking them, what kind of climate is going on, the amount of moisture in the soil, they're pretty in flux. We'll say it that way. But this is a really great way to look at your soil and say, hey, if you're going from this blocky structure on the left here in that circle on the left to the friable, crumble, beautiful Tierra Negra on the right, then you know you're on the right track. And and I want you to know that both of these soils did come from my yard, which is Blackland Prairie. Obviously, the soil on the left has not been as treated as well as the landscape soil on the right, which just receives leaves and mulch. So keys and practice to soil health. This is straight off the NRCS website. The only thing I changed, I took out grazing and put in mowing. So we want to maximize soil cover and allow the vegetation to grow taller. Maximize the presence of living roots in the soil. Minimize soil and vegetation disturbance, especially soil compaction. It's really hard for people to understand how difficult it is for roots to survive under soil compaction. And that was probably, as a city arborist, that was probably one of the biggest things, was to try to protect that soil underneath a tree, underneath its drip zone, to protect its roots. So maximizing biodiversity of plants and soil organisms, and again, modifying mowing practices to accomplish the above. So what we talk about, and I know that it's been kind of put out that I think Calvin, when I first came to San Antonio in the 90s, Calvin Finch was talking about mowing at 3 inches. But we found out that a lot of our contracts for contract mowing is at 1.5 and 2 inches. So what we want to put out there and however we can in all different ways of public education is that 4 inch is the preferred minimum height for a turf area. We want the mowers, if you have a contract operation, we want the mowers to set the height because they actually can set their blade and then let the line trimmers follow because it's really tough for a line trimmer to understand exactly how high they're cutting the vegetation until they start getting in the practice. What is 3 inches actually looking like? And then for the summertime, we're asking folks to actually stop mowing. You can cut the top off with your line trimmer, but allow that vegetation to grow to 5 to 6 inches. And in all cases, avoid scalping. And we know that the commercial landscape maintenance operators often will scalp in order to reduce what they need to do the next time they come to the site, because there's nothing hardly there to mow, right? And eventually they will actually kill the plant, which causes erosion, which loses that topsoil, which takes us all the way back to degraded soils versus building soil health. And we also want to recommend avoid mowing when the soil is wet and saturated. And if you need to go out there using that line trimmer. But let's take a look at this diagram. I love this diagram. We couldn't make it any better ourselves. And this is really for non-irrigated turf areas. We're not talking about soccer fields or golf courses. We're talking about the thousands and thousands of acres that we have in San Antonio that is non-irrigated turf areas. So what happens when you mow short? I swear, I wish you guys could just tell me these things. We could have this exchange, but we'll read it from the notes. So when you're mowing it short, you're exposing the top layer, that organic layer that we're trying to build up. We're exposing it to the heat, to drought, to surface water runoff. And the thing that's so difficult for folks to understand is that you're exposing that topsoil where you're going to have the perfect seed bed for all the weeds that you really don't want. Even if you're a la natural, there's some plants you go, I do not need any more cheatgrass in my yard. I don't need any more of the Caribbean mallow, etc. This is where you actually get a lot of your weeds, is by mowing close. And on the far side to the left, you can see this taller, it looks like it's about at 4 inches. The roots are more robust, they're deeper, which of course creates a more drought tolerant turf area. So this strategy assisting with climate change. It's just a simple, direct. Plants depend on the roots to survive, especially in dry weather. Therefore, the more robust the root system, the more drought tolerant the plant. Taller plants with their more robust root systems are a constant source of soil organic matter, which continually feeds the microbes. And the taller vegetation is better able to slow the stormwater so it'll soak into the ground, remove the pollution, especially the sediment that's in our stormwater. That's probably one of our number one, that and bacteria is our number one pollutants in San Antonio that keep our waters impaired, preventing soil erosion and weeds. And then, of course, assisting in maintaining that soil health. And yes, that root system over to the right, many of you may have already seen this, but that's a little blue stem. And yes, this has grown up in the a little bit better soils up in the Midwest, but we can get root systems very similar to that over in our Blackland prairies. Line trimming. So these are some of the situations that we were seeing in the parks in that top image. It's often the only way they can really manage, or you can manage, slopes. And we are making the recommendation, and the new specs are calling for 5 to 6 inches on slopes. The line trimmers can be used to quickly remove the tops of plants to form that uniform height, because everybody likes to see a uniform height, including myself. I'm guilty. And this can be used during droughts. Instead of mowers, you don't even have to take the big equipment out. And definitely use a line trimmer when the soil is wet if you absolutely have to mow. Some more line trimmer. How many are familiar with seeing around San Antonio the weed eater disease on the newly planted trees? Yeah, yeah, it's pretty sad. This is over at one of our drainage projects that turned into a parks where this tree has been killed with damage to the outer bark on the trunk. And why is this an issue? Helping people understand that right beneath the outer bark, and before you get to that hardwood that you can see in that diagram, that outer bark right in between there, that is where the plumbing for the tree is located. That means you've got the water coming up from the roots going up to the canopy, and you got the food from the canopy going down to the roots. Sorry, I haven't been so popular until I get on the Zoom, right? So there's some instructions about using tree guards if you don't have gator bags. And there's some trees like Texas persimmon and crepe myrtles that will never develop a thick bark. So you've got to use some alternatives or protect them. And if you've got a tree where more than 30% of the outer bark has been damaged, like this tree on the top left that's already dead, it, it should actually be just removed and replaced. Mulching. I like organic mulches. I have used rock, and there's some places for rock, especially in maybe in a rain garden or something. But organic mulch is the way to go when you can, because it not only protects the soil from evaporation, high temperatures. I think Lisa and I did some testing, and we had anywhere between 7 and 14 degrees difference between a mulch area and just the typical bare soil out in a park area. I think that was Woodlawn Lake. But when that bark mulch breaks down, it makes a beautiful organic matter for the soil. So adding it around new trees, we're all familiar with that, but I want to encourage actually putting it around larger trees for two reasons. And one is to not only do all the things that we know that mulch can do, but also to encourage the roots to go deeper, because there is a tendency to do especially with the water restrictions, we hand water and we have a tendency to just do the hose around, and that water probably doesn't go in more than 1 inch. And by doing that sort of application, you are encourage all the roots to come to the surface. And what we want to do is deep watering when we do water, protect the water that's in the soil, and get those roots down to those lower levels in the soil where there's more consistent water that they can depend on. And my favorite trick is gathering the leaves and putting it in the, whether it's a landscape bed or around a tree, and then covering it with the bark mulch to give it that professional look. So what happens when you do the volcanic mulch? So I accidentally wasn't watching a Texas persimmon tree in my yard because I had inland sea oats around it, and I didn't realize the mulch had gone up against the trunk. It actually rotted the outer bark of the trunk, and I lost my Texas persimmon. Um, the other thing that we find, and this is very, very common with volcano mulching, is that the tree roots will actually grow up in that mulch and wrap around the trunk. And tree roots, we call those girdling roots, those roots will actually expand in diameter to the point where they will crush the piping that does the food and water transport in the trunk of the tree. So they can actually strangle a tree. We always want to avoid fresh sawdust because it robs the nitrogen, especially during that first year. And again, avoid mounding that up against the trunk. Soil amendments. I love compost. Um, Compost, it can be applied to the top, which is what I primarily do now. It can be mixed in. but it is a great kickstart for any soil. If you wanted to, you can pretty much get to that 1% increase in soil organic matter by just adding an inch and a half inch to an inch of top dressing to your turf areas or to your landscape. We know that it's made up of decomposed organic matter. We've got the beautiful Atlas Organic provides the green waste compost. And then we've got the manure compost from New Earth. Both great producers. I love going to their facilities. And but be careful about the vendors that are selling it mixed in with soils, because there's been some issues around town that people have complained about that, yeah, it's got compost, but they're putting in some other kind of material that looks like powdered clay, or it could be structured sand, which is actually ground limestone. But that we're finding that that just makes a hard pan on top of the soil. So I want to encourage folks to go straight for the compost, even though it may have a little bit of an odor to it still. So you can pretty much apply these soil amendments any time of the year. You want them to be weed free. That's what's great about the compost, is that it's been pasteurized to kill pathogens and weed seed, well aged, so that it's not still taking in nutrients from its surrounding. And this is really, really crucial for over the aquifer, is that you want to make sure you don't have a soil amendment that has more than 3% nitrogen. Anything more put on at one time is just pretty much wasted. And when the nitrogen, say you have a 12% or even an 8% nitrogen, is going to be lost with every irrigation or rain event. And where does that go? It goes into our aquifer, into our groundwater for well usage, and of course into our lakes, rivers, and creeks. Maintenance and low impact maintenance areas. Okay, so this is a park term, and I think we should all kind of adopt it. Maybe Sarah might have some other ideas that we could kind of be using the same terminology, but this doesn't mean, and when you say no mow areas, parks has gotten quite a bit of pushback from some of the public. No mow, we don't want to see that. So we feel like the low maintenance area, and that's what we can work with code compliance on too for our yards or other properties, is that, yeah, this is going to be maintained, but it's less maintenance than a typical turf area. And for these, I mean, these areas will give the biggest bang for the bucks on uplands. They're reducing the emission from mowing. That's a direct thing that could actually be calculated, reducing labor costs. It builds the organic matter quicker than any other vegetation. And again, of course, this taller vegetation will remove pollutants for stormwater, slowing it down and sequestering and storing more soil carbon. And we all know that these areas produce or increase biodiversity. So, of course, where they're located can depend on what kind of maintenance it's going to need. I love this pocket prairie. It's still there. I saw it a year ago. They're in the Houston Medical Center, and that would be called high maintenance. It's probably not something that is feasible in our park or public spaces, but the pocket prairie on the bottom, this is from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, is just exactly what we're looking for, to be able to do more of these in not just the natural areas, but also in our regular parks. Maintenance in these areas, people are a little bit overwhelmed of what this is going to mean, because it could be a little bit more hands-on, and it could require some greater skill at plant ID. So we're recommending that these areas be walked through 1 or 2 times a year to look for invasive, woody, or non-native materials that are not wanted, that need to be removed. They can be removed by hand, they can be reduced or cut to remove just the flower heads to keep them seeding. And we did notice that an area that was just 1 year, its first year, it was loaded with Canadian lettuce, which is like a sow thistle type plant, pretty ugly, not very pretty. But they seeded it, they kept maintaining it, and very low maintenance. And the next year they had a lot more wildflowers and less of the Canadian lettuce. So we're still kind of learning on how to manage these areas so that they can be publicly accepted, but we also want them to produce or to be pollinating areas and to help increase biodiversity. So some of the reasons, and there's some mixed information from people that I've spoken to out on the internet or whatever, but here are some that seem to be the most consistent. To mow can assist in managing brush and weeds, and it can definitely assist in public acceptance and safety. To mow or not to mow, I think that's going to be one of the biggest questions, and how and when should we mow? So again, to reduce mowing, reasons are for maintaining biodiversity, wildlife food sources, and their cover. We forget about cover. People go, "Oh, I was just in a meeting. Well, we just need to make that function. We need to make it a soccer field." I'm like, so it's important to help others understand that these areas, even though children may not be playing soccer in them, that they do have a role to play. And the big one for really, really important, and it's really big for us to maintain our Bird City USA status, is to avoid mowing, disrupting feeding, mating, and ground nesting sites for birds, such as, and again, I would ask you what some of those were, but we'll just name a few. One of my favorite, which is the killdeer. Thank God they have learned how to make their nests on top of big box stores. The nighthawks, the whippoorwill family. There's some of the sparrows that are in that group. And the one bird that everybody recognizes, no matter where we give this training, are ducks. Yep, I think that's great that Public Works avoids mowing in their drainage areas during the ducks or this time of the year. And we have seen ducks nesting in some of those drainage areas that are part of our 13 demonstration parks. So just some rule of thumbs, it appears that more mowing can lead an area to be dominated by grasses. Extensive overmowing can promote annual wildflowers. Okay, we all like wildflowers, but will reduce soil health. So the big thing is, how do we have both? And one of the compromises that we've been worked out with the NRCS is that you can use your mower to mow patches, especially along areas that are of high visibility, to give you that annual wildflower color. And I always laugh and go, thank God cows don't like to eat bluebonnets, or we wouldn't have a state flower, because bluebonnets love overgrazed and highly mowed areas. Otherwise, if mowing is needed, avoid between that mid-February to early July for the ground nesters and also the spring migration. Try to keep those heights at 5 to 6 inches, and please don't take that equipment into the area when the soil's wet. And why maintain a minimum height of 5 to 6 inches for our native grass areas? So most of the grasses that we're going to be looking at, whether it's cupgrass or cytosgrama, blue grama, black grama, anyway, little blue stem, Indian grass, big blue stem, whatever, they're going to be bunch grasses. And for the bunch grasses, their growing point is higher above ground. It's at least 3 inches and sometimes more above ground level. So we want to make sure that not only are we not cutting off the growing point, but we're also leaving some material. The exceptions to these are the buffalo grass and the vine mesquite, which kind of produce like Bermuda grass through stolons, but they also benefit from being left at 5 to 6 inches. Maintenance along rivers, creeks, and lakes. So the land along a river, creek, or lake plays an even greater role of improving air and water quality. These properties are crucial, and we call them riparian areas. And these areas, the way they're maintained, directly impacts water levels, flood control, and the quality of recreational activities. It's crucial to leave a Lima buffer of at least 10 to 15 feet from the water's edge. The buffer width should be wider for steeper slopes. Trees in this buffer area would provide additional bank stabilization while providing shade over the water to cool that water and increase your the biodiversity in your water. Vegetative buffers will filter out pollutants. It's amazing if putting a grass filter in front of a tree filter, you've got nutrients like nitrogen, sediment, these are removed at up to 99% are removed. So they're crucial for maintaining the capacity in a lake. And of course, it's also important to remove those pollutants for habitat. So uncontrolled access to a water's edge leads to soil degradation and water pollution. And here's a photograph. This is taken at Woodlawn Lake Park, where we're going to be trying to hopefully working with the councilwoman and her constituents and the River Authority, I think, too, also to try to change some of the management practices without having to install BMPs even. We can just look at reducing some of the access so it's not everywhere, anywhere around a lake or along a stream. And we can manage that access in a very soft way by stop mowing a minimum of 10 feet from top of bank, establishing physical barriers with natural materials or actually riparian plantings. And what we'd like to see along these areas is to maintain a living lake side that's shown in this photograph that will give you definitely more fishing, but also greater birding and improved water quality. You know, I actually saw a little western bittern at Woodlawn at one time in my life. I'm going, can I create its habitat again out there? That would be cool. All right, planting aquatic plants is just one of the best things you can do for reducing access to the the water's edge to maintain to reduce runoff and to improve water quality. And it's this water quality that's going to increase the ability for folks to enjoy the water even more. And there's a lot of mixed uses. I mean, I learned something new. So at Woodlawn, you've got the regatta folks that don't want tall vegetation because it blocks the wind. So some way there'll be some compromises. And we'd like to look at creating a hardened an inviting access point that will direct human traffic with the kids to do whatever kind of activity they want to do at the lakeside. But of course, we've got a great slate of aquatic or riparian grasses and plants that we can use to accomplish these goals. Trees, one of my favorite topic. Again, these are the valuable tool to meet urban challenges that are part of a healthy landscape. And the healthier they are, the more service they will provide. And the tree's health depends on the health of the soil that it's growing on and on its maintenance. So trees also benefit soil health by contributing new soil organic matter through their leaves and roots and by protecting the existing soil organic matter. Basic of tree pruning, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with it, but it's one of the things we want to assist in creating those healthy landscapes is just making sure that proper cuts are used and that stubs are not left, and to not remove more than 25% of the foliage at one time. We want to avoid the abused trees that we see a lot of in our around the city, line tailing, which is an over prune tree. And I always this is so amazing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of training going on throughout the city, and I know our tree maintenance license assists and in that area, but what happens when you remove all that interior foliage on the tree limb? It makes it like a sail. All the weight is on the branches. And I didn't have room to include more photographs, but this is being done a lot in Houston after Harvey. And so what occurs is that I'm driving through Houston and seeing all these broken branches. They get a big wind and that branch just snaps. Topping, of course, produces wounds that are not possible for a tree to heal. The branches are weakly attached, easily broken, and making them a liability for future. So again, if we had that dynamics, I would say, how can we save this tree in that hard, compacted soil where there's not much oxygen going on, there's no infiltration, but I think you get the idea of what we can do. Equipment, having the right equipment is really important. I won't go too much in the equipment, but knowing that some of the riding mowers will actually go up 4 inches or more, but a lot of them will not. And if you wanted to do a higher cutting, which is highly recommended, especially in some of the pocket parks, here's some of the equipment that you can utilize to accomplish that. Oops. And we think, so one of our goals is to really, really try to keep mowing equipment out of riparian areas. And if you have to do some mowing operations, there's a specialized equipment. In fact, in our demonstration, we had a vendor come and they actually brought some of their auto robot mowers that you can either remote control or it has a map that it can mow for you in these areas. But avoiding rolling your piece of equipment and avoiding compaction is crucial for these areas to provide the functions that we need them to. And the biggest things that we were trying to work and teach in these classes, and hopefully that you'll understand that we really want to avoid ruts, compaction, and scalping. We think that by doing these higher vegetation heights, that scalping will be less of a problem. We'll find out, but there's a whole slew, and I always tease the guys that don't put your heaviest guy on the riding mower, okay? There's going to lead to compaction. So you can try to find the lightest person in your team to do the mowing. Some other things that we want to share about just having healthy landscapes, etc., is putting that material back on the ground. Yep, it's illegal to blow it out into the streets, which in San Antonio is a part of our drainage system, so it can cause flooding and it does cause pollution. And encouraging folks to using proper pruning methods and hiring an arborist, which not only carries insurance, but knows how to use its own safety, personal safety equipment. So to our last practice, one of the favorite ones that we'd like to talk about is adding a BMP to increase the benefits. So no matter where you are, stormwater is running downhill. And we can capture all the water on your property by not only increasing the soil health and the organic matter, but also by putting in a BMP. And I feel like that this is something that we're going to be using more and more of. I'm hoping that we'll be able to use some more additional more of those in the floodplain, and I'll show you a great picture of that. And but these BMPs can be really simple, non-engineered for increasing vegetation and reducing runoff and erosion. And just remembering that when you reduce runoff and you reduce erosion, you're going to get more vegetation. That's even if you have high browse pressure, that's going to happen. If you have high browse pressure, then you can utilize some of the brush material on your property to protect that. I've done that a bunch of times in the up in the recharge zone where we were helping people with rain gardens. And the bases of the BMP across the slope, and again, they can be made of temporary materials such as brush or mulch, or permanent ones such as rocks. And to increase their effectiveness, adding a swell or a trench, and filling that trench with more permeable material or substrate. That means removing it, the soil that's there, putting it on the berm, and then putting a more highly permeable media into the infiltration trench. And then when you combine that with plantings, you get triple benefits. So here's some samples, just some ideas, and again, looking at the roots of not just the native grasses, but also the forbs and how deep those roots can go when they have enough moisture and they have the depth of the soil, and how they can increase the depth of the soil without additional irrigation. We've got our row of rocks that are, some properties have tons of rocks. Love to use some more of these on some of our natural areas. We've been talking with Wendy up there about some of these, especially in the Camp Bullis area. Creating the media lunas, which would be perfect for individual tree plantings to capture some of that additional water. And on a lot of locations, you'll have, especially where you've got a good slope, not much vegetation, you'll start having a gully happen. And that happens on some of our creeks. We're looking at headwaters that has a little runoff, a creek area from the 281 highway runoff that's making a really nice head cut. So here's some of the things that you can do there. Creating a Zuni bowl, has a plunge pool, also utilizing that one rock dam in there, but this will dissipate that energy so you can stop eroding that soil out as it goes back further and further, losing that topsoil into our creeks, rivers, and we don't need it there. So Zuni bowls can also be used to reduce the impact of culverts and bridges. And I see this a lot on properties, and this may be even happening on your property or at your house, that you can have some cool looking little Zuni bowls that can capture that runoff and stabilize your point of discharge there. So isn't this cool? I love this photograph. So this is a bioswale, an enhanced bioswale along the Blanco River. I really, really want to see more of these done. I think that if we could put those along our streams, creeks, and rivers, not only will we reduce stormwater runoff and peak flows, but we'll also improve the water quality of the water that's going in there, because they'll act like, they may not be designed as a lid feature quite, but they will act in the same way in reducing the pollution that's coming from the stormwater before it gets into our creeks and rivers. And don't forget, we don't even have this on our radar really in San Antonio, but just, I would like for you guys to go out there and look. Where could we put a constructed wetland? Could we put one at Brackenridge Park, away from the hiking trails, away from the picnic tables, so that we could actually encourage the birds that want to be there, give them a place to go. But also, this constructed wetland has the potential for increasing the carbon sequestration capabilities by 7 times of what an upland project can do for us. So wetlands have an amazing capacity for mitigating stormwater, removing pollution, and increasing carbon sequestration. And of course, that's where the peat bogs come from, right? In summary, soils have greater potential to sequester more carbon dioxide from the air than above ground vegetation, but they work together. Healthy soils increase the potential of both above ground vegetation. The potential for using soils as a mitigation tool would be less in Central Texas than in East Texas due to the heat and the rainfall, i.e., the more heat causes soil organic matter to break down more quickly. That's why we want to protect it. The lack of moisture reduces soil biome robustness. The co-benefits for improving soil are unmeasurable, and it's true. It's extremely, we've looked into that. It's extremely difficult to measure it, but it can be done with, species biodiversity, soil organic matter levels, and aggregation. But one of the most important, critical thing that we're looking at is increasing drought and freeze resiliencies in our landscapes to withstand climate change. Thank you so much for your attention. I apologize that I do not have a clock on me, but
You're good, Debbie.
do we have time for questions and
Yeah,
answers,
we
right?
do. Yeah, we do. So please utilize the chat feature for any comments, questions, or concerns you may have. But Debbie, I want to pick your brain a little bit because I've been having a conversation online throughout the conversation about the scope of this presentation geared more towards, I guess, uh, homeowners and those individuals involved with like parks, open spaces, management and upkeep of what these natural turf areas. How could you see this being implemented as we combat development across the Texas Hill Country?
For development of the hill country?
Yes, like in terms of, yeah.
Well, that's a part of it. That's why I want you guys to come up with a definition for a healthy soil because for what's being used right now on some of the development in our hill country areas, Nathan, they're just grinding up construction material and calling it soil.
Mhm.
So it actually has to be codified or
Okay.
because we know that incentives don't have not worked. Had that discussion in the Stormwater Management Advisory Board is that LID has not been adopted well because the stormwater fees, which was the main incentive, they're just not high enough to get capture the adopters. So there has to be a big enough carrot to make it worthwhile, or a big enough
Mhm.
stick to to utilize to make the incentives. Does that answer that question? And
I believe
how
so.
and I think that, San Antonio Water System actually went to the state legislature and made it so that HOAs could not demand people have turf areas because that's one of their biggest water wasters, especially in the hill country. I think Annalisa tells the story about, yeah, I just put, 2 or 3 inches on and it disappears right away when you're over the recharge zone. So making what irrigation that we do put on work more for whatever we want there, but also working with concepts, perceptions. Everybody seems to want to live on a golf course, but how do we encourage and I think we're getting to the point where the market is big enough and people are becoming aware of the benefits of having green space not only in their neighborhoods or in their parks, but also to bring that home.
I agree. Thank you. And I have some other comments, Debbie. Um, Regarding the NRCS baseline study, I'm not too sure if you know this, but do you know if McAllister Park was one of the parks surveyed in that NRCS baseline study?
Yes, there is a data point in there.
Okay, thank
So
you. And
that's gonna be the deep carbon, that's like the 3-foot carbon versus the soil health that we're doing on those 13 parks.
awesome. And then I have another comment about what about the water catchment area on Fredericksburg Road? And I think it's talking about the Old Spanish Trails Park system.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, could that be used for animals and plants as well?
Whoever made that recommendation, let's get together. Um, yes, yes, it can happen. They're still using both, areas for soccer, but one of them. Let me put it this back up a little bit. So Parks lease those 2 fields out to an organization, a soccer organization. Many of us will know the director of one of those of that organization. It's Ed Garza, a former mayor. So I would love for him to see if he would be open to maybe not take that less developed soccer field, maybe not take all of it, but to actually be able to utilize some of it to do some of these plantings. And because the exciting thing, just one more thing, I know we're running out of time. There's there is research out there. It's not really well done yet, but there's research out there that says that you can actually increase the capacity of stormwater detention facilities by improving the soil aggregation, improving the soil health, because they'll infiltrate faster. And anyway, okay, that's enough.
No worries. Okay, I guess I have two quick questions. I'm gonna stop Q&A because it is 4:30. Um, do you have any advice for increasing soil organic matter in caliche soils, like composting, planting native grasses?
There's no reason why you can't do all of them. And yeah, you're going to be very frustrated, but eventually that clay will actually create aggregation.
Thank you for that. And then last one is, where is the data available for soil health and park sites? I guess they're talking about
The
the data
report.
that we've been, the report from our report. Okay.
Mhm.
And is that up on the GIA website yet?
You know, say, I'm not
You understand?
sure.
Okay, I think we have to, are we,
Yes, it is up on the GIA website. So we
okay,
have, if you go in, it's where it says resources in the library. Then there's a section that says, I think it says managing soil for climate change. I think it's in that section.
I'm not sure if Parks has allowed us to release their data. We scrubbed their data out of the report we posted, unfortunately. And I think that they're becoming comfortable enough to release that data. And
So we'll put it up.
so we'll be working with Parks again next year. We're going to have a whole nother phase 3 of this, and we'll be working with master naturalists. We're hoping that not only will they kind of help monitor these parks, but coming up with ideas and kind of adopting these parks to see if we can build soil health, because we know with especially educated folks like the master naturalists to have their eyes on these parks, we know we can get there faster.
Okay, and I'm just going to add, if you want to go to the GIA website, we have several publications. That's on the front page under publications, and then in the library we have a low impact development section. We have managing soils for climate change. Several different sections where you can find really good information.
thank you for that. So I'm gonna close Q&A. I'm gonna turn things over to Rachel to conclude and promote our next Water Walk series.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Debbie, for a really interesting presentation. Really appreciated that. So our next Water Wonks lecture is our 10th one. It'll be on October 23rd, always at 3:30 p.m. And it's going to be the Texas Legislature 101. And Annalisa and I will be doing a joint presentation as we gear up for the 89th Texas Legislature starting in January. So we hope to see all of you there. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us. You have a good afternoon.